Thomas froze in the middle of the crowded New York bar as he watched Charles lean in and kiss the woman standing beside him. In that instant, all the whispered promises of a shared tomorrow that had kept Thomas going for years evaporated into thin air, leaving him with nothing but the bitter taste of betrayal. The laughter and clinking glasses around him blurred into a dull roar. Thomas could not move, his feet rooted to the sticky floor while his heart hammered against his ribs. Charles, the man who had held him through sleepless nights and promised a life together, now had his arm wrapped around Emily from the law firm. Her laugh rang out clear and bright as Charles brushed a strand of hair from her face. Thomas had come here tonight to celebrate Charles's promotion, expecting the usual secret smile across the room. The quick brush of fingers under the table that reminded him their love was still alive even if hidden. Instead, he stood witness to a public performance that made every private vow feel like a cruel joke. He slipped out before anyone noticed, the humid summer air of Manhattan hitting him like a slap. Streetlights reflected off wet sidewalks as he walked without direction, the city noise fading behind him. How had 5 years collapsed in one kiss? He remembered the rainy afternoon in their sophomore year at NYU when Charles had pulled him into an empty lecture hall and kissed him for the first time. "I've never felt this before," Charles had whispered, eyes wide with fear and wonder. Thomas, the quiet graphic design major from a small Ohio town, had believed him completely. They built a secret world in his tiny Brooklyn walk-up. Late dinners cooked together, weekends pretending to be just buddies on group trips, stolen mornings where Charles would leave before sunrise to keep up appearances. Every time Thomas asked when they could stop hiding, Charles answered the same way, "Soon, when the firm makes me partner. When my dad stops pushing the family image. Just give me time, Tom. Our future is coming." Time had run out. Thomas's phone buzzed in his pocket. The text from Charles read, "Hey, where'd you disappear to? Party's just starting." He stared at the screen until the words blurred, then shoved the phone away. Back in his apartment, he poured a glass of whiskey and sat on the couch surrounded by photos he had carefully cropped so no one could guess the truth. His best friend Alex called an hour later, voice steady as always. "I heard about the party from a mutual friend. You okay, man?" Alex was the only person who knew everything. He had listened through every doubt, every fight, never once telling Thomas to walk away until tonight. "He kissed her right in front of me, Alex, like I was invisible." Alex sighed on the other end of the line. "I warned you, Tom." Charles is terrified. His family still thinks he's the golden straight son who'll marry well and carry the firm. Your parents back in Ohio ask about girlfriends every call. But you can't keep waiting for someone who keeps moving the finish line. They talked until the sky lightened outside the window. By the time Thomas hung up, he felt a crack in the numbness, a small space where anger and resolve began to grow. The next morning, he opened his laptop and accepted every freelance project that came in, burying the pain under deadlines and color palettes. Yet every time his phone lit up with Charles's name, he felt the wound reopen. That weekend, his mother called from Ohio, voice bright with the usual questions. "Tommy, your cousin just got engaged to that nice girl from church. When are you going to bring someone home? You're 30 next year." Thomas mumbled something about being busy with work and ended the call quickly. The pressure from home had always been there, traditional expectations wrapped in love. Coming out to them felt impossible while he was still waiting for Charles to choose him openly. Society in New York offered pockets of safety, but the fear of losing family, clients, and the fragile life he had built kept him silent too. He stared at the ceiling that night, replaying every promise Charles had made. The future they had planned, the house upstate, the dog they would adopt, the vacations without looking over their shoulders. None of it had been real. It was just words to keep Thomas waiting. By Monday, the shock had settled into a steady ache. Thomas met Alex for coffee in a quiet cafe near his studio. "I think I need to stop answering his calls," he said, stirring his drink without drinking. Alex nodded. "You deserve someone who chooses you in daylight, not just in the dark." The words landed heavy but true. Thomas left the cafe with a new determination forming. He would not chase a future that Charles had already given away. The decision felt like the first real step he had taken alone in years, small but solid. Yet as he walked home, the city seemed larger, colder, and the road ahead stretched long and uncertain. The psychological storm inside him was only beginning. The invitation arrived 3 weeks later in a thick cream envelope with gold lettering. Charles and Emily's engagement party. Thomas stared at the card for a long minute before setting it on the kitchen counter like it might burn him. The date was only 10 days away. Part of him wanted to rip it up and never speak to Charles again. Another part, the part still clinging to 5 years of memories, needed answers. He texted Alex a photo of the invitation. The reply came instantly, "Don't go. You'll only hurt yourself more." But Thomas had already decided. He would attend not to celebrate, but to look Charles in the eye and force the conversation they had avoided for years. The night of the party, the venue was a rooftop bar overlooking the Brooklyn Bridge, string lights twinkling against the skyline. Thomas arrived early, dressed in the navy suit Charles had helped him pick out 2 years ago. When Charles spotted him across the room, his smile faltered for a split second before he recovered and walked over. "Tom, you came. I wasn't sure." Up close, Charles looked tired, eyes shadowed. Emily stood a few feet away chatting with guests, radiant in a silver dress. "We need to talk," Thomas said quietly. Charles glanced around nervously. "Not here. Later. Okay?" The brush-off stung exactly as expected. They found a quiet corner near the bar an hour later. Charles's voice was low and urgent. "This doesn't change us. Emily is just family pressure. My dad threatened to cut me off if I didn't settle down soon. But you and me were still the real thing." Thomas laughed bitterly. "Real thing? You kissed her like you meant it. You introduced her as your fiancé to everyone. How long were you going to keep me in the shadows while you played house with her?" Charles reached for his arm, but Thomas stepped back. "I love you, Tom. I always have. Just give me a little more time to figure this out." The same promise recycled. Thomas felt something inside him finally snap. "Time is the one thing I don't have left to give you, Charles." Before Charles could answer, Emily appeared at his side, slipping her hand into his. "There you are, babe. Your dad wants to make a toast." Charles's face went pale, but he forced a smile and let her pull him away. Thomas watched them walk off, the perfect couple in everyone's eyes. The misunderstanding was complete. To the world, Charles was straight, successful, engaged. To Thomas, he was a coward who had used love as a leash. The rest of the night blurred. Thomas drank too much, laughed too loud at jokes that weren't funny, and left before the cake was cut. On the subway ride home, he deleted every photo of Charles from his phone. The act felt final, like closing a book he had memorized cover to cover. The next morning brought a different kind of pain. Charles showed up at his door unannounced, eyes red. "I couldn't sleep. Please, Tom, don't end us like this." They sat on the couch in silence for a long time. Charles talked about his father's expectations, the partnership track at the firm, the fear of losing everything he had worked for. Thomas listened, really listened, and for the first time saw the fear behind the charm. "I'm scared too," Thomas admitted. "But I can't keep hiding. It's killing me." Charles reached for his hand. "Then let's run away. Just you and me. We'll move to California. Start over where no one knows us." The offer sounded beautiful and impossible at the same time. Thomas pulled away. "That's not a future, Charles. That's another hiding place." The conversation ended with Charles leaving in tears. Thomas sat alone afterward, the weight of the decision pressing on his chest. He had always been the one to bend, to wait, to protect Charles's secret. Now the roles were reversing, and it terrified him. That afternoon he called his mother and for the first time hinted at the truth. "Mom, there's something I need to tell you eventually. I'm not who you think I am." She laughed nervously. "What does that mean, Tommy?" He couldn't say the words yet, but the crack in the dam had formed. The psychological conflict inside him grew sharper. Loyalty to Charles versus loyalty to himself. Work became his escape. A big client in San Francisco offered him a 6-month contract to redesign their entire brand. The timing felt like fate. Thomas accepted without hesitation. Packing his apartment gave him purpose. Each box he taped shut felt like sealing away a chapter. Alex helped load the moving truck on the last day. "I'm proud of you, man. This is the right move." As they drove toward the airport, Thomas looked back at the city skyline one final time. New York had been their city, their secret. California would be his alone. The plane lifted off into a clear blue sky, and Thomas allowed himself one quiet tear. The future he had waited for was never coming. He would have to build a new one from the pieces left behind. San Francisco greeted Thomas with fog and possibility. He rented a small studio in the Mission District, surrounded by artists and open-minded neighbors who asked no questions about his past. The new job consumed his days with color theory meetings and late-night revisions, but the nights still belonged to memories. Charles texted every few days at first, then weekly, each message shorter than the last. "I miss you. Emily and I fought again. Please call." Thomas read them all but never replied. The silence was its own kind of power. 3 months into the move, his mother called in tears. "Your cousin saw pictures on social media. Someone tagged Charles at his engagement party and you were in the background. She said you looked upset." "Tommy, what's going on?" The secret was beginning to leak. Thomas took a deep breath and told her everything, voice steady despite the shaking in his hands. The line went quiet for a long moment. "I love you," she finally said, "but I need time to understand." The conversation ended better than he had feared, yet the distance between them felt wider than the continent. His father sent a single text the next day. "We're praying for you." The words carried both love and judgment. At work, Thomas met new people who knew nothing of his past. One colleague, a straight ally named Jordan, invited him to a pride planning meeting after noticing the small rainbow pin on his bag. For the first time, Thomas attended openly, helping design posters and feeling the weight of years lift slightly. The experience was liberating and terrifying. He realized how much of his identity had been tied to Charles's secrecy. Without that anchor, he was learning who Thomas really was. Then the call came that changed everything. Charles's voice on the line sounded broken. "My dad found out. Someone from the firm saw us arguing at the party and put 2 and 2 together. He gave me an ultimatum. End whatever was going on with you or lose the partnership and the family trust fund." Thomas closed his eyes. "What did you tell him?" The pause lasted too long. "I told him it was over, that you were just a confused friend." The betrayal landed like a physical blow. Charles continued quickly. "It was the only way to keep my job, Tom. But I still love you. We can figure this out quietly." Thomas hung up without another word. The man who had promised forever had chosen safety over truth once again. That night, Thomas walked the foggy streets until dawn, the city lights blurred by tears. He thought about every sacrifice he had made. Missed family holidays, turned down dates, the constant fear of being discovered. All for a love that crumbled the moment real consequences appeared. The turning point arrived with the sunrise. Thomas sat on a bench overlooking the bay and made a decision. He would no longer wait for anyone to choose him. He would choose himself. He started small. He joined a support group for gay men navigating family rejection. He updated his social media with a simple post, a photo of the Golden Gate Bridge and the caption, "New chapter, no more hiding." The likes and comments from old friends poured in, some surprised, most supportive. Alex called immediately. "You did it. I'm so damn proud." The validation felt like oxygen after years underwater. Charles tried calling again, left voicemails full of apologies and new promises. Thomas deleted them all. The psychological shift was profound. Where once he had defined himself through Charles's love, he now measured his worth by his own courage. The conflict that had built for months finally crested. He flew back to New York for a single weekend to clear out the last of his storage unit. While there, he ran into Emily at a coffee shop. She looked at him with genuine kindness. "Charles told me everything. I'm sorry for the pain he caused you. The conversation was brief but healing. She wasn't the villain. She was another person caught in Charles's web of fear. Back in San Francisco, Thomas threw himself into volunteering at the local LGBTQ center, teaching design workshops to young artists coming out. The work gave him purpose beyond himself. For the first time in years, he felt light, unburdened. The major turning point had arrived. The day he stopped waiting for Charles to become the man he promised and started becoming the man he was always meant to be. 6 months after the move, Thomas stood on the stage at the Pride Festival, microphone in hand, introducing a panel on creative careers for LGBTQ youth. The crowd cheered when he mentioned his own journey from hiding to this moment. The applause washed over him like a wave, carrying away the last remnants of shame. Later that afternoon, he received a message from his mother. "Your father and I watched the live stream. We're coming to visit next month. We want to understand." The words were simple but monumental. The family that had once represented impossible expectations was now reaching across the divide. Charles's engagement party photos appeared in a local society magazine. Thomas saw them by accident while scrolling news. Charles looked handsome in his tuxedo, but his smile never reached his eyes. A mutual friend later told Thomas the wedding had been postponed. Charles had apparently had a breakdown at the rehearsal dinner, confessing to his parents that he could not go through with the marriage. The news should have brought satisfaction, but it only brought sadness. Thomas realized he no longer carried anger toward Charles, only pity for a man still trapped by the very fears Thomas had escaped. One crisp autumn evening, Thomas met someone new at a gallery opening. His name was Michael, a teacher with kind eyes and an easy laugh. They talked for hours about art, travel, and the courage it took to live honestly. There were no secrets, no whispered promises of someday. Just two men enjoying the present. Thomas went home that night feeling hopeful for the first time in years. The romantic moment he had once imagined only with Charles now felt possible again, on his own terms. Yet the past refused to stay buried completely. Charles showed up in San Francisco unannounced, standing outside Thomas's studio with a duffel bag and desperate eyes. "I left everything. The firm, the family, money, Emily. I told them the truth. I'm here for us, Tom. For real this time." The words Thomas had waited half a decade to hear now sounded hollow. He invited Charles inside but kept the door open, a symbolic boundary. They talked through the night. Charles described the months of therapy, the fights with his father, the panic attacks that finally forced him to choose honesty. Thomas listened without interruption, then spoke his truth. "I love the man you're trying to become, Charles. But I'm not the same person who waited for you. I've built a life I'm proud of, and I won't go back into hiding for anyone." The conversation lasted until sunrise. Charles cried when Thomas asked him to leave. "I sacrificed everything for this moment," he whispered. Thomas answered gently, "You sacrificed for yourself, not for me. That's the difference." Watching Charles walk away down the foggy street felt like the final page of their story. There was no dramatic fight, only quiet acceptance of two paths that had diverged. Thomas closed the door and stood in the silence, feeling both loss and profound peace. The betrayal that had once shattered him had become the catalyst for his freedom. The following weeks brought more growth. Thomas's parents arrived for their visit, nervous but determined. They met Michael over dinner and listened as Thomas shared his full story. His father struggled with the words but managed to say, "We don't understand everything, but we love you." It was not perfect acceptance, but it was a beginning. The family pressure that had loomed for years began to transform into cautious support. Thomas realized acceptance was not a single moment but a lifelong conversation. Winter arrived with rain and reflection. Thomas spent long weekends hiking the Marin Headlands, the vast Pacific stretching before him like endless possibility. He thought often about the boy he had been in Ohio, the young man who fell in love in New York, and the person he had become in California. Each version carried lessons. The misunderstandings with Charles had taught him boundaries. The secret revealed by others had forced honesty. The betrayal had built resilience. Every decision, every consequence had shaped him. At the LGBTQ center, his workshops grew popular. Young men came to him with stories eerily similar to his own. Secret relationships, family ultimatums, the terror of living openly. Thomas shared his journey without sugarcoating the pain. "The future you're waiting for won't arrive until you stop waiting and start building it," he told them. The words felt earned. One evening after a session, a 19-year-old named Ryan approached him. "You gave me hope tonight. I'm going to tell my parents this weekend." Thomas hugged him and remembered his own first step. The circle of growth continued. Charles sent a final letter, handwritten and honest. He had moved to Chicago, started a small legal aid practice helping LGBTQ clients, and was attending regular therapy. "I understand now why you couldn't wait," he wrote. "Thank you for forcing me to face myself. I'm proud of the man you've become, even if I can't be part of it." Thomas read the letter twice, then placed it in a box with other mementos. He no longer needed to carry the weight daily. Forgiveness had arrived quietly, without fanfare. The climax of his emotional journey came during a family video call on Christmas Eve. His parents, sister, and cousins gathered on screen. Thomas introduced Michael officially. There were awkward moments and questions, but also laughter and genuine curiosity. His mother wiped tears and said, "We're learning, Tommy. We want to be part of your life." The acceptance he had craved for years finally felt real. The societal pressure that had once crushed him now seemed distant, like a storm that had passed. New Year's Eve found Thomas and Michael on the roof of their building watching fireworks over the bay. Michael pulled him close. "I'm glad you waited for yourself, not for anyone else." Thomas kissed him under the exploding sky, the moment sweet and uncomplicated. The romantic happiness he had once imagined only in secret now existed in daylight. The journey had been long and painful, but every step had led here. Spring brought new beginnings. Thomas signed a lease on a larger apartment with Michael, a place filled with light and plants and no more hidden corners. His design business expanded, landing a contract with a national nonprofit focused on LGBTQ youth. The work felt meaningful, a way to turn his pain into purpose. He traveled back to New York once more, this time for Alex's wedding. His best friend had found love with a woman who accepted Thomas completely. Standing at the altar as best man, Thomas felt the full circle of friendship that had never fractured. Charles sent a postcard from Chicago with a simple message, "I'm happy for you. Truly." Thomas pinned it to his studio wall as a reminder that growth was possible for both of them, even on separate paths. The rifts in family and friendship had healed in their own time. The sacrifices he had made, letting go of a love that could not survive in daylight, had created space for something healthier. One sunny afternoon, Thomas stood on the beach where he had once imagined a future with Charles. Michael walked beside him, hand in hand. They talked about plans, not whispers of someday but concrete steps. A summer trip to visit Thomas's parents, adopting a rescue dog, maybe even marriage one day. The conversation flowed easily because honesty had become their foundation. Looking back, Thomas saw the entire journey clearly. The shocking moment in that New York bar had been the beginning of the end and the start of his real life. The misunderstandings, the betrayal, the painful truths, every piece had forced him to grow. He no longer defined himself by who loved him in secret. He stood tall as a man who loved openly and lived without apology. The sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky in gold and pink. Thomas turned to Michael and smiled, the kind of smile that reached every part of him. The future he had waited for had finally arrived, built by his own hands and heart. In the end, the greatest acceptance was the one he had given himself. True or false? Sacrificing your authentic self to meet family and societal expectations will ever lead to lasting happiness?